The story begins by showing that the mafia boss is Raghav Shetty, who's always against the law. He is a very powerful Indian and is feared by everyone. Apart from being a mafia boss, Raghav is also a Muay Thai expert, who was once a world champion. On the other hand, there is a woman who is beating the gangsters, but it turns out she was just shooting an action movie. The woman is Saya, a beautiful actress who is famous in India. After filming for a long time, she took a short break. But not long after that, Raghav and his men came to the shooting place. Apparently he came to collect a debt from Saya's father named Kirana, but because he couldn't pay, Raghav finally decided to kidnap Sia. Panicked, Kirana immediately reported the kidnapping to the police, but they didn't want to investigate the case as they had been bribed by Raghav. Therefore, Saya's father reported it to the minister. But again, the report was rejected, as the minister was also bribed by Raghav. At the same time, Raghav and his men took Saya to Thailand and hid her in a penthouse that was very difficult to penetrate. Meanwhile, Kirana didn't just give up. He and his friend went straight to the ambassador to beg for help. But unfortunately, the embassy couldn't help because the case was the task of Interpol. While they were both confused about who else to ask for help, Kirana remembered someone who could definitely solve the problem. The person is Ronnie, the main character of the movie. He is the most powerful and respected martial arts master in India who never loses a fight. But at the same time, Ronnie is in the hospital with his adopted brother, Subbu. Apparently, Subbu was suffering from a rare disease. He couldn't speak because of vocal cord problems. And if he wanted to be cured, he had to be surgeon at a very high cost. However, Ronnie didn't have that much money. When Ronnie was thinking about money, he was suddenly surprised by the presence of a man who turned out to be his friend, Kirana. After making small conversations, he immediately asked Ronnie for help to save Saya, and he promised to pay him 530,000 rupees if Ronnie could save her. But it turns out that Saya is his ex-girlfriend, so he doesn't want to deal with her anymore. But on the other hand, he still has feelings for her, and he also needs money for his adopted sister's surgery. So inevitably, Ronnie had to accept the offer. Long story short, Ronnie finally left India to Thailand. Then on the plane, he found out about Raghav's location. He couldn't wait to finish him off and save Saya from his clutches. But before that, let's flash back for a moment. 3 years ago, he met Saya on a train when she wasn't yet an actress. Then, when he wanted to change carriages, Ronnie saw Sia nagging herself because the rain suddenly stopped, even though she really liked the rainy atmosphere. Seeing that, Ronnie could only laugh because Saya was talking to herself. Embarrassed, she immediately sat down in her seat. Here, Saya rides the train with her mother and father. From her appearance, Saya looks more like her mother because her father is too absurd, likes gambling, and likes to dance in public places. Not long after, the train they were riding stopped because it had an engine failure. Meanwhile, Ronnie continues to flirt with Saya, which makes her misbehave. Despite meeting for the first time, the chemistry between them grows so fast, until finally they were dancing in the pouring rain like a typical Indian movie. But unexpectedly, Raghav is also on the train. He saw Saya's beauty and he approached her right away. However, Saya didn't respond to him. When she wanted to board the train again, Saya told Ronnie that her father had suddenly disappeared. Ronnie immediately looked for him around the station. Even though his father was already on the train, and unfortunately, the train was running before Ronnie returned. As a result, he must be willing to part with the woman he likes. That night, Raghav was seen having dinner with his father, who was a martial arts master named Guruswamy. The next day, Ronnie went to Guruswamy's martial arts studio in Kerala. Once there, he was amazed by the training atmosphere, but his main purpose was to deliver a letter from his late father, who was a good friend of Guruswamy. Apparently, the letter contained a request where Ronnie's father wanted to entrust his son to Guruswamy, be educated to become a great fighter, and to have a better attitude. Because all this time, Ronnie always used his martial arts knowledge for fisticuffs and often acted rude in front of others, as he was doing in front of Guruswamy's students. Seeing that, Guruswamy immediately reprimanded him. But because Ronnie didn't want to listen, he immediately slammed his body with one hand and humiliated him in front of everyone. Ronnie, who was initially arrogant, immediately shut up and followed the rules in the studio. In addition, he also had to live simply in the dormitory. He had always been pampered with the wealth of his father, who was a special forces commander. At the same time, there was a boat race going on, which Raghav and his men were eagerly following. Moreover, Saya was watching the competition, so Raghav rowed his canoe faster to look cool in Saya's eyes. But when he won, she walked away. Then not long after, he met Ronnie, who was working as a porter in the market to earn money to buy food. Again, their meeting was followed by a very heavy rain, which made the atmosphere more romantic. They both promised to meet every time it rained. In the evening, Raghav is training hard at the studio hall, and he is dueling with the Indian Naruma sword, which is known to be very deadly. But while fighting, his focus is suddenly broken and distracted as he imagines Saida's beautiful face. As a result, his left chest was hit by the sword, and he went berserk on his opponent. Raghav immediately continued to beat him relentlessly. Fortunately, Guruswami stopped his son's attack, because Raghav could have killed one of his students. At the same time, Ronnie was having dinner at a nearby restaurant with Subbu and one of his friends. While they were talking about women, a man suddenly joined them. It turned out that the person was Kirana, who was none other than Saida's father. He then gave Ronnie advice on how to approach women, because he had been a playboy when he was young. But here Ronnie doesn't know that he is the father of his future girlfriend. The next day, Ronnie wakes up to a hangover due to a night of partying. As a result, Guruswami punished him by making him a cleaner and helper in the studio. Starting from preparing food, harvesting fruits, to ringing the bell to mark the time. But he didn't realize that Guruswami was training his physical strength as well as his level of patience. A few days later, heavy rain poured down the city, and Saya immediately rushed to meet Ronnie as promised the other day. But when she wanted to go out, Saya was surprised by the arrival of Raghav. Even so, Saya still went to meet Ronnie. Therefore, Raghav immediately spoke to Kirana that he wanted to marry Saida. But as a father, Kirana wouldn't allow his daughter to get married before she fulfills her dream as a top actress. Hearing this, Raghav immediately gave 400,000 rupees to Kirana so that she would accept his proposal. On the other hand, Saya had just climbed up a lighthouse to meet up with Ronnie. But when she got to the top, she shouted and got angry, because he hadn't come yet, even though Ronnie had been there first. But when Ronnie appeared, Saya's anger immediately disappeared, until finally they decided to date. And since then, their relationship has become even closer. In addition, the two of them also often go on dates in style, starting from picking banana hearts, picking coconuts, and making videos with local residents. In fact, because of her love for Ronnie, Saya even gave him a ring given to her by her father. Saya said that the ring was very precious in her life, so indirectly she trusted Ronnie 100%. After the date, Ronnie returned to the hostel drunk, having drunk too much beer. And unfortunately, Guruswami was waiting for him in front of the training center. Then when Guruswami saw him drunk, he immediately felt disappointed in him, as well as guilty towards Ronnie's late father. To make matters worse, Ronnie was angry back at Guruswami for not being trained like the other students. Not only that, he also intended to go to China to study Shaolin, and that made Guruswami a little angry. He said that the roots of Shaolin came from Indian ancestors who traveled to China. Then after scolding him, Guruswami walked up to him and immediately made a move to Ronnie's stomach. As a result of Guruswami's punch, Ronnie regained consciousness instantly, but just as he wanted to apologize, Guruswami dragged him in front of a mirror. There he motivated the young man to be strong like a lion instead of a deer that is always preyed upon. But when Ronnie was digesting his sentence, Guruswami suddenly made a sudden attack on Ronnie. But amazingly, Ronnie was able to parry and dodge all the attacks from his teacher. Until finally he realized that all this time he had been trained indirectly through daily activities, like preparing food, ringing bells, and being a helper. Since that night, Ronnie also asked for forgiveness from Guruswami because he had never been respectful to him. Afterward, he promised to be devoted to Guruswami and would follow all the training processes at the studio. Because of his hard training, Ronnie began to master all the techniques taught by Guruswami. Raghav even recognized his skills and promised to take Ronnie to Thailand to participate in a world-class Muay Thai tournament. A few days later, Ronnie ended up going out with Saya again. But on that day, he finally found out that she was Karana's daughter. Then when Karana saw the ring Ronnie was wearing, he got angry and told him to stay away from Saya. After that, Karana came to Raghav at the studio to tell him that Ronnie had snatched Seda. And of course, Raghav was so furious that he intended to kill Ronnie. However, his words are overheard by Guruswamy, who is immediately disappointed because he was never educated to be a bad person. It turned out that he had never been happy with Raghav's job of earning money through illicit means. Seeing his father's anger, Raghav invited him to lunch together and apologized for what he had said earlier. But apparently he was just pretending to be nice in front of Guruswamy, whereas he had originally put poison in his own father's food. After killing his own father, Raghav continued his evil plan. He then ordered his men to kidnap Sabu. Not long after, his men approached Ronnie and Sabu, who were playing in the market. Ronnie, who was suspicious, immediately took Sabu away from there. But unfortunately, Sabu was successfully kidnapped. Raghav replied that the kidnapping was just a threat to keep Ronnie from underestimating his power. He also wanted to keep him away from Saida. But Ronnie wouldn't leave it at that. The next day, all the students at the center attended Guruswamy's funeral. Apart from Ronnie, Raghav and his men also attended this ceremony with a relaxed face. Ronnie, on the other hand, looked very sad because Guruswamy was like his own father. Especially during this time, he has been educated to be a very strong fighter, even though only in a short time. But when the funeral was over, there were 4 policemen who came to arrest Ronnie for the fight that happened yesterday. On the way to the police station, he passed Raghav's car, and Ronnie was very surprised when he saw Saya's father, who was also in the car. The next day, Ronnie was discharged from the police station, having not been found guilty of any intentional crime. But despite not being convicted, he was asked to leave the city. Later, Ronnie met Saida and told her that his father had collaborated with Raghav to separate the two of them. But Saya didn't believe him, as her father had always been kind and very good to her. Hearing this, Ronnie understood Saida's feelings. She couldn't possibly believe that her father had evil intentions. Then, before leaving, Ronnie asked to come to the station if she really loved him. After that conversation, Saya could only cry while confiding in her mother and grandmother. But on the other hand, Karana has been blinded by Raghav's money, to the point that he deliberately hurt himself. Then afterward, he told Saya that he had been beaten by Ronnie. Not only that, she also lied that Ronnie accidentally threw the ring given by Saya into his face, and of course Saya was very disappointed with Ronnie. Saya even invited his father just to move cities to become a famous actress, and most importantly, she wanted to forget Ronnie, even though Ronnie was waiting for her at the train station. But because of Karana's slander, he was no choice to accept the fact that Saya no longer cared about him. In the end, he had to leave the city along with Sabu. Then the scene returns to the present, where Ronnie has just arrived in Bangkok. On the other hand, Saya is seen throwing a tantrum while slamming Raghav's expensive belongings. Seeing this, Raghav tries to calm her down and tells her that he loves her very much. But Saya rejected his feelings outright. At the same time, Ronnie immediately ordered a taxi to go to one of Raghav's free fight clubs on the outskirts of Bangkok. But strangely, the taxi driver he ordered was blind, and even more strangely, he could drive the car with the help of his sister-in-law, who was directing the way. Arriving at his destination, he invited the taxi driver and his sister-in-law to join a bet in the club, because it is certain that they will win. Then, without wasting any more time, Ronnie immediately challenged the defending champion at the club, who had never lost before. However, Ronnie only had to kick once. Seeing that, everyone was dumbfounded because they had never seen anyone as strong as Ronnie. Moreover, he could defeat the reigning champion with just one kick. Meanwhile, one of Raghav's men reported Ronnie's whereabouts immediately. The next day, Raghav's men broke into Ronnie's lodgings, but he was already aware of their arrival, as the fight last night was his attempt to provoke the gangsters out of the cage. He told the taxi driver and his sister-in-law to leave immediately, Meanwhile, he herded the gangsters to an open area and beat them all up. Besides being good at fisticuffs, Ronnie can also do parkour. Amazingly, he could combine martial arts with his parkour movements. At the same time, the taxi driver and his sister-in-law were caught by Raghav's men, and they were severely beaten. Fortunately, Ronnie arrived in time to help them both. After defeating them all, Ronnie inquired about the position of Biju, who was Raghav's right-hand man. Then, after getting the answer, Ronnie rushed to his place. He immediately pointed a gun at Biju while smothering his wife. As a result, Biju was no choice to tell the location of Raghav's headquarters, which was in a building with very tight security and inhabited by many gangsters and street fighters. Meanwhile, Saya is locked up on the 10th floor, which is none other than Raghav's penthouse. On the other hand, Saya tries to escape from the penthouse, but unfortunately, she is hit by one of the guards there. As a result, Raghav panicked. He immediately called Biju and told him to call an ambulance. Then they suddenly come to the hospital. Of course, their conversation was overheard by Ronnie. He forced Biju to tell him the location of the hospital, and if he refused, Ronnie would not hesitate to kill his wife. Not long after, Ronnie finally arrived at the hospital based on the address given by Biju, and was again followed by the blind driver. Then, without wasting any time, he immediately disguised himself as a doctor, so as not to get caught by Raghav's men. In the end, he could find Saida. Unfortunately, Raghav received a report that one of his men was being held caught by Indians. He immediately knew that it was Ronnie. Raghav immediately ran to Saya's room with his men, and sure enough, he ran into Ronnie and Saya, who were trying to escape. But despite being surrounded, Ronnie was still able to escape by pretending to kidnap Sia, because after all, Raghav loved Sia very much, and of course he could never hurt her. After escaping from the hospital, Ronnie and Saida said goodbye to the two drivers who had helped them all this time. As a token of gratitude, Saida gave Raghav's expensive necklace so that the two drivers could sell it and buy a new car. On the way, Ronnie and Saya didn't talk to each other because they still hadn't cleared up the misunderstanding that happened 3 years ago. As a result, they can only remember the past that may not be repeated. Long story short, they finally arrived at the hideout. In this place, Saya brought up the past again, until finally the two of them argued with each other. But not long after that, the rain suddenly fell very heavily. Ronnie then immediately covered Saya's bod, so as not to get wet because of the rain. Then Saya accidentally saw the ring on Ronnie's little finger, which meant that she had been lied to by her father, even though Ronnie was still loyal to her. After straightening out this misunderstanding, they finally forgave each other. Then their relationship returned to normal, and they lived happily in the outskirts of Thailand. They decided to stay there for a while, until the situation was completely safe. But while they were walking by the sea, Ronnie was suddenly hit on the head from behind. After being satisfied with beating Ronnie, Raghav immediately ordered Biju to finish him off on the spot. Raghav then took Saya back to his penthouse. There he invited her to get married and start a new life in Thailand. But not long after, it rained quite heavily, and at the same time Saya was very sure that Ronnie would come to save her. Hearing this, Raghav burst into laughter, as he had seen Ronnie drown in the sea with his own eyes. But unexpectedly, Saida's words came true. Ronnie then climbed up to the 2nd floor and immediately finished off all of Raghav's men who confronted him. But this time he was really angry and didn't hesitate to kill anyone who got in his way. Meanwhile, Raghav was shocked when he saw Ronnie's brutality on the CCTV camera. He immediately realized that Biju had betrayed him by helping Ronnie. Apparently, Biju deliberately shot Ronnie with an empty bullet as a payback of Ronnie's kindness. That is because Ronnie refused and canceled to kill Biju's wife when asked about the location of the hospital. Hearing Biju's confession, Raghav was furious and killed him on the spot. Raghav announced over the speakers that an intruder had entered the building. Whoever could finish him off, he would give a reward. After hearing the announcement, the building occupants immediately locked Ronnie in a corridor, but his brutally could eliminated all the gangsters without a single one left. Ronnie succeeded in taking down of the building's residents. But on the 8th floor, Ronnie had to face a fighter with a large body and a high level of martial arts skills. Of course, this made Raghav furious, and he immediately ordered his strongest men to confront Ronnie to prevent him from reaching the 10th floor. Incidentally, his men had a grudge, as his younger brother was killed by Ronnie. After fighting for a long time, Ronnie finally could defeat the fighter very brutally. But when he wanted to take Saya away, he was intercepted by Raghav. Unfortunately, Ronnie was too tired to face him. As a result, Raghav could knock him out. Then Raghav suddenly said that he was the one who killed Guruswami, so that he could rule without anyone forbidding him. Hearing that, Ronnie immediately remembered the death of his teacher, and it made him rise again to avenge the teacher. But before starting again, Ronnie said that he had mastered his Guruswami's ultimate move that could never be defeated by anyone. Raghav, who saw the move, was immediately frightened, until finally Raghav was killed. At the end of the movie, Ronnie and Saina decide to return to India and start a new life as couple. In addition, Ronnie also returns to the studio to find teachers for students who want to become great fighters like him. With this new life, the movie ended.